about the whole concept, and also to just give a brief introduction of how these 5-part lecture series will be conducted and organized, inshallah. I hope you see our screen. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. So we start today by just reciting Surah Al-Fatiha, and then we will introduce the lecture with Professor Osman. After the lecture, we will have a Q&A session, so you're free to write your questions in the Zoom chat, dear excellent participants, and we will address them in the end of the session to Professor Osman, inshallah. And then we will end by sharing some forms and doing just a closing dua as well. Together with me, we have Sister Fatima and Sister Yusra from the ISIP organization, and they will be at your service, sharing some resources in the Zoom chat. And if you have any questions, we're always at your service, inshallah. Barakallahu feekum. So please keep your microphones muted at all times, so that it doesn't disturb the lecturer. No recordings and screenshots are allowed. We will offer the recordings to all of those who registered after the program series is over. So that will be for your benefit. And also we will also share resources and reading material and the PowerPoint slides as well. If you have any questions, you're more than welcome to ask them in the chat, dear excellent brothers and sisters, and we will address them to either Professor Osman, or if it's a question to us as organizers, we're always at your service. If you need any live transcriptions, you can please press the more button in the end of the screen, of the Zoom screen, and there you just push the request button, and then we will be more than happy to give you live transcriptions as well, inshallah. Just a little bit about how you guys can engage with ISIP, the International Students of Islamic Psychology. We offer a lot of courses, seminars, programs. We have different task forces for supervision, mental health support groups. We have both local and regional chapters all over the world, including Malaysia and Indonesia and other Southeast Asian countries. So if you want to be part of the ISIP movement and be part of disseminating knowledge of Islamic psychology and building bridges and being a springboard for further development of studies or practices or research within the field, feel free to contact us through our website, isip.foundation. You can also join or subscribe to our ISIP YouTube channel, where the lectures with Professor Osman Bakar will also be added. Sister Yusra will also share the WhatsApp group links to our Islamic Psychology WhatsApp group for resource sharing. And if you're not already part of the groups, you're more than welcome to join to benefit from all the great resources that are shared daily by all of our excellent members, brothers and sisters. Also, if you become a member, and membership in ISIP is free of charge, then you will get access to our digital library with over 1,000 resources within the field of Islamic psychology, inshallah. So let's go to the next slide. So today's session is a collaboration with ISTAC and IIUM. And as you know, ISTAC and IIUM are the leading Islamic institutions in the universities in the world. And we're so honored as ISIP to collaborate with ISTAC and IIUM. IIUM, as you know, is a university offering so many different programs and within Islamic thought. And ISTAC is also a very important institution for Islamic thought as well. And Professor Osman Bakar will lead us during this 5-series program. And in the end of the program, you will also get a certificate when you do the quiz that we will send as an email. It's a quick mini assessment, dear brothers and sisters, that you will get after each lecture. And it will be available after 3 days, inshallah, connected together with the recording of the session and the slides. And then if you answer the assessment, you do the assessment and you finalize them in a proper way. After the 5th session, you will all get a certificate that will be signed by ISTAC and IIUM and ISIP, inshallah, for your benefit. So the first session today will be with the topic about understanding Al-Ghazali psychology, a synthesis of perspectives. This is the first lecture. And to introduce our esteemed scholar, Professor Dr. Osman Bakar, our Murabbi. Professor Bakar is a doctorate in Islamic philosophy from Temple University, Philadelphia, in the United States of America. He is currently holder of the Al-Ghazali Chair of Epistemology and Civilizational Studies and Renewal at ISTAC-IIUM, the International Islamic University of Malaysia. Would you please mute yourself? Hello? If you could mute yourself, please. Thank you. He also holds the Emeritus Professor in Philosophy of Science at the University of Malaya. He's author and editor of 41 books and more than 300 articles on various aspects of Islamic thought and civilization, particularly Islamic science and philosophy, in which he is a leading authority. He has been named among the 500 most influential Muslims in the world since 2009, subhanAllah. Next session, before we start this session, dear excellent brothers and sisters, will be Saturday, the 4th of June. And the lecture will be about Al-Ghazali's understanding of psychological wellness and illnesses. Assessments should be completed before next lecture, dear participants. Only those who complete and pass the 5 assessments will receive an e-certificate, inshallah. And thank you so much for attending, by the way. And dear brothers and sisters, please forgive us for any shortcomings and make dua for us. And please fill out the short feedback form that we will also share in the Zoom chat at the end of the session today. So let me stop sharing my screen now. So I think I stopped sharing my screen. Okay, perfect. So without any further ado, dear brothers and sisters, let us now welcome our excellent Murabbi teacher, Professor Osman Bakar. The floor is yours. Welcome. It's an honor to have you with us.
I thank you, Brother Said Jamaluddin. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and a very good day wherever you may be. First of all, I would like to take this opportunity to greet you this Eid al-Fitr and Mubarak. We are still celebrating, and we hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has blessed our Ramadan, accepted our Ramadan, and now we in the month of Shawwal with all the duties expected of us. So let me begin with a few introductory remarks. Today's lecture, as has been mentioned, is the first of a 5-part lecture series on the theme of Islamic psychology from the Ghazalian perspective. The lecture series is jointly organized by International Students of Islamic Psychology, ISIP, and Al-Ghazali Chair of Epistemology and Civilizational Studies and Renewal at ISTAC-IIUM, of which I am the current holder. I must thank ISTAC, especially its Dean, Professor Abdulaziz Baragud, for the encouragement and support that he has given to the lecture series. My special appreciation and thanks to Brother Said Jamaluddin, Baron Miri, and Sister Fatima Ahmad of SIP, who initiated the idea of the lecture series and then seriously followed up to ensure that it becomes a reality. So Alhamdulillah, thank you. Now, I just want to tell you that I have prepared a few slides to guide me the lecture. And besides that, I also have prepared some notes and passages that which I may read from time to time. And I have done that because there's an understanding between me and ISP that inshallah, after we are done with the lecture series, I will come up with a book based on the lectures, inshallah. Hopefully it will materialize. Now, returning to the theme of the lecture series, which is Islamic psychology from the Ghazalian perspective. Let me try to explain what it means and to point out its significance for human thought in general and for psychology in particular. My discourse on the theme is planned to be presented in 5 lectures. In this first lecture today, I will focus on the multi-perspectival and yet unified nature of Al-Ghazali's psychology. What I intend to focus here, or to argue here, is that on the basis of what we know about Al-Ghazali's life and thought, and related facts about Islamic intellectual history, we could say with certainty that several perspectives of Islamic psychology existed in the mind of Al-Ghazali. But the wisdom he embodied was such that he was able to integrate the multiple perspectives in question into a unified whole. In short, Al-Ghazali did create a synthesis of ideas on the soul that were circulating during and prior to his time. The concrete content of his integration, or the concrete content of integrative, is integrative and unifying or synthesizing wisdom will be identified later in this lecture. From an analytical point of view, we may speak of Al-Ghazali as having several psychological perspectives in his mind. But from a holistic point of view, we may speak of him as having only one unified perspective on psychology, to which the term Ghazalian perspective may aptly be applied. However, the Ghazalian psychological perspective or synthesis would be only fully understood and appreciated if its 3 synthesis components, that he inherited in the form of specific perspectives, that he inherited from specific perspectives from his Muslim predecessors, were to be firstly made known. Accordingly, an identification of these components is called for. But before we proceed with it, there's an important issue that needs to be said about the usage of the modern term psychology, and is in the context. What I mean is that the usage of the modern term psychology in the context of a discourse on traditional understanding of an-nafs, soul, in all its dimensions, and its equivalent terms like al-ruh, spirit, al-qalb, heart, and al-aql, intellect, reason, as what we are doing. So this is important, and to stress that we are talking about psychology, but we may understand psychology in a certain way, certainly from the more influenced by the modern perspective. But we are talking about this term as applied to Al-Ghazali, who lived many centuries ago. So the issue here is about whether or not the semantic field of psychology, even when fully understood, will be able to do full justice to the traditional science of the soul as found in Islam, as articulated by Al-Ghazali, or for that matter, as found in any other religious tradition. This issue is briefly discussed. I'm going to discuss now this issue. So the issue here is what I call the disputed semantic field of modern psychology. I'm arguing here that psychology is a contested term. I would like to be clear about this before proceeding. with discussion of Al-Ghazali's perspectives. Now, not a few modern scholars and thinkers have drawn attention to what they contend is the limited nature of the domain of inquiry of modern psychology into the inner realities of man. Let me repeat here. I'm arguing that the current term psychology is tainted with what I call the limited nature of the domain of inquiry of modern psychology into the inner realities of man. Now, one such scholar is Huston Smith, author of the widely acclaimed The Regions of Man, who is also the author of the widely acclaimed The Postmodern Mind, and also The Forgotten Truth. Now, in the book Forgotten Truth, the Primordial Tradition, in the course of commenting on the traditional inquiry into the levels of reality as they appear within man, or levels of selfhood, Smith tells us that he would have called the inquiry ready. He was ready to call the inquiry, quote, an excursion into psychology, were it not for the fact that that word, as currently understood, denotes at best but half the ground to be covered, end of quote. He argued that a better word than psychology to designate the science of the soul or spirit as traditionally understood would be pneumatology. Now, let's try to understand the rationale of Smith's argument. He reminds us that a basic premise of the traditional outlook is, quote, the isomorphism of man and the cosmos. The isomorphism of man and the cosmos, end of quote. Of course, he's referring here to the traditional idea of man as the microcosm, or al-alam as-saghir, as it is known in Islamic tradition. The argument here is that if we know how vast and hierarchically complex is the cosmos, then in the light of the isomorphism principle that Smith has quoted, we would also know that the human soul is likewise vast and complex. But somehow, modern psychology, says Smith, is only able to cover at most half the vastness of the traditional human soul. Now, I would add to his argument, Smith's argument in favor of the term pneumatology rather than the term psychology as a designation of the science of the soul or spirit on the basis of the scope of the subject matter. This finds further support in the etymological meanings of the two words. I'm going to explain now. The terms psychology and pneumatology are respectively derived from the words psyche and pneuma, both of which are ultimately of Greek origin. Actually, yes, the word psyche, that from which the terms psychology is derived. This is a Latin corruption of the Greek psyche. But in the case of pneuma, it is purely a Greek word. Now, psyche and pneuma refer to certain inner reflection, certain inner realities within man, but they are not synonyms. In ancient Greek thought, we could observe differences on the semantics of the two words, pneuma and psyche. Latin psyche. Although there's a certain overlap of meanings, which is anyway explainable and justifiable, at least certainly from the ontological and cosmological points of view. This observation is at least true, even when the two words, this observation is at least true when the two words are given the right interpretation. But for many people, the differences are not so clear to see, especially when both words are rendered into English as spirit or soul. This is because the difference between spirit and soul is indeed quite subtle. In some other respects, spirit and soul refer to one and the same thing, but in other respects, they are different. Now, this issue pertaining to the difference between pneuma and psyche in the Greek context, the context of the ancient Greek thought, is to be encountered again later, but in an Islamic setting or context, when we present Ghazali's explanation or the meanings of roh, spirit, and nafs, soul. Now, the Greek pneuma is derived from the root word pnein, P-N-E-I-N, which means to blow or to breathe. Pneuma is thus unsurprisingly found to convey the meanings of air, wind, and breath. I got that word, air, wind, and breath from the etymological dictionary, in fact. All right. Now, yeah, pneuma is found to convey the meanings of air, wind, and breath, which are all connected to the act of blowing and breathing. I would like to here to make some comments about this meaning of air, wind, and breath, right? Which are connected to the act of blowing and breathing. Now, since pneuma is something spiritual, the Greek word pneuma is spiritual, something spiritual. The words air, wind, and breath should not be taken to mean the physical things with which we are familiar. Rather, these are physical symbols signifying inner realities that are known by the same name. So we should understand air, wind, and breath to mean their corresponding non-physical, invisible, and indivisible realities within the human person. We know that in ancient Greece, symbolism was one of the powerful means of expressing truth. The other ways of expressing truth, allegories, myths, legends, is only a small minority in the Greek context who use the philosophical and scientific or the rational ways of expression. People like Plato and Aristotle. Now, but what I'm arguing here is that air, wind, and breath here are to be to be understood as physical symbols pointing to inner realities, spiritualities within man. Now, in the wind, just take the case wind, because pneuma, one of the meanings of pneuma is wind. Wind is a powerful symbol of the spirit. Wind is a powerful symbol of the spirit, and the symbol is universal, not limited to Greece, right? But is universal. Now, according in Islamic context, according to Ibn Arabi, there's a close etymological meaning, or there's a close etymological relationship between spirit and wind. Let me quote here from Ibn Ibrahim. So Ibn Ali said, the root word in Arabic, the root word of ruh, spirit, is reh, it's the wind. Right. Well, if you but there's also a cosmological relationship, such as through phonetical symbolism. So you listen to the sounds in Arabic, ruh, rih, right? So for those, especially the Sufis particularly take a great interest in this, they say there is a phonetical symbolism in that. What the rih symbolize, and it's very, very interesting thing. Yeah? So the nature of spirit is best illustrated by wind. Spirit in itself is invisible and indivisible, but it is visible through its traces. Likewise, wind is invisible, but it is visible through its traces, such as movement of leaves of trees. Now, spirit needs a medium, which is none other than what is to be found in various traditions, the inner wind. Now, in Buddhism, for example, this wind is called Vayu in Sanskrit, which entered the Malay vocabulary as Vayu. And the Malays already have a word for wind, which is angin. As a way of emphasizing this, the Malays say angin Vayu. So angin Vayu is another form of angin or wind. I thought it's very, 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 very interesting thing. But what I'm saying to you here now is to emphasize that yes, spirit we cannot see, we cannot visualize, but we can understand the nature of the spirit by knowing, for example, the nature of wind, which is supposed to be a symbol of the spirit. Now, let me go on that. Now, the also conveys the meaning of spirit itself, which is to be understood as the thing that is being blown. This we know very well in the Quran, all right? There's reference to I think it's Surah 15, verse 29. The verse sounds this: Bismillahir-Rahmanir-Rahim. فَإِذَا سَوَيْتُهُ وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي فَقَعُوا سَاجِدِينَ. That important is that the act of blowing, the act of blowing and breathing, and from that spirit is blown into the body of Prophet Adam alayhi salam. Now, so it's very interesting there's this similarity in the symbolism of blowing. So the spirit is associated with the act of blowing into a body. Now, the translation of pneuma as spiritus in Latin, hence spirit in English, was correct, but not as anima in Latin. Anima is not as anima, which is translated into English as soul. Now, as for the Greek psyche, it conveys the meanings of a breath, the breath of life, the spirit, or soul, a mind and spirit. But it appears that its primary signification is a soul, although spirit is included in this range of meanings, hence suggesting an overlap of meaning between pneuma and psyche, to which I earlier referred. The Latins understood this primary signification well when they gave the Greek loan word psyche the meaning of anima, or in English the meaning of soul. Now, in the etymological dictionary that I have cited in my earlier, it is stated that psyche or psyche is personified by the Greek goddess same word, Suke, goddess of the soul or spirit, the source of life, souls and mind. Now, it is to be noted that the various Greek derivatives from Sukha all pertain to the phenomenon of souls and animation, psychosis, animation, psychosis, in the terrestrial world, which falls under the realm of the goddess. Now, this is in terms of mythological context of the Greeks. All right. Now, I just want to point out here the Greek idea of animation, there is psychosis, is a principle of celestial life, was misunderstood in the Christian West as state of the psyche or state of mind, which became transformed into the psychosis of the psychiatrist. It's very, it's something that worth noting, all right? Now, it is quite clear from the etymological meanings of Numa and Sukhe that the former pertains to the origin and nature of the spirit and its relationship with the soul, while the latter, Sukhe, pertains to the animation or the breathing of life into the world. In the light of this etymological distinction, we may therefore infer that the term Numa refers to the soul in its universal aspects and spiritual dimension, and in a state of existence independently of physical bodies. As for the term psyche, it refers to the soul in its aspect of individuality and its relationship with bodies through the process of animation. Hence, there is an ontological and cosmological basis for admitting pneumatology and psychology as two separate and distinct disciplines with their respective subject matters or objects of study. So, looking at the ontological difference between Pneuma and Psyche, we may infer that the former pertains to the higher soul, while the latter pertains to the lower soul. In short, ontologically speaking, Pneuma stands above Suke or Psyche. Hence, epistemologically speaking, we may view pneumatology as a higher kind or science of the soul, and psychology as a lower science of it. Now, this view would mean that it is justifiable for pneumatology to serve as a foundation of psychology. But the only thing is that the word in the West, the word pneumatology has been operated by the church. I mean, pneumatology has become a Christian or a science of a part of theology, basically. Okay? It is science of the Holy Spirit. But I mean, as far as the Christian West is concerned, but otherwise, pneumatology is basically a universal name, quite a universal name for the spirit. Now, in the history, very often in the history of ideas, the original meanings or the etymological meanings of important words, key words in the civilization best correspond to reality. What is reality? Rather than those words that were to be understood much later in the history. So I believe that, for example, we know that the word pneumatology has been associated with Plato. So Plato, yes, the word Plato's psychology has been mentioned, but I think what is central to Plato's science of the soul is pneumatology, and also Aristotle. It is interesting that in the case of Aristotle, there's a recent research article by Abraham Bosch, the Pneuma as quintessence of Aristotle's philosophy. because for so long in the West, Aristotle psychology has been associated with the animal, the soul. But a new research reveals that much more important than the psyche or the psyche is normal even in the case of Aristotle. Now, at this point, I would like to affirm that the main reason why I have raised the issue of the semantic field of modern psychology before discussing Al-Ghazali psychology is because there is a need to point out that ilm nafs, or science of the soul, as understood in Islam generally and by Al-Ghazali in particular, cannot be equated with psychology as understood in the modern sense. That's the main reason. Now, the differences between modern psychology and traditional Islamic psychology are not quantitative but qualitative. If we continue to use the term Islamic or Al-Ghazali psychology, then we do so with the understanding of qualitative differences in mind, as pointed out by Kristen Smith. Now, with that, I would like to, with that discussion as a background, I would like to now to go briefly to the historical intellectual background in the case of Ghazali's thought, the pre-synthesis component. All right. Now, my purpose is basically to identify the components of basically Islamic psychology before Al-Ghazali undertook the task of the synthesis of those psychological perspectives. Now, let me go. So this background is basically that. Now, Abu Hamid Muhammad Al-Ghazali, this is his full name, is one of the greatest thinkers and scholars not only in Islamic but also in world history. Al-Ghazali belonged to the 5th century of the Hijrah or 11th century of the Common Era, and the 6th century Hijrah and 12th century Common Era. Now, by the time he was born in the 450 after Hijrah and 1058 of the Common Era, Islamic civilization has already passed a formative stage. Knowledge inspired and generated by the Quran and the prophetic teachings, and knowledge that Muslims inherited from earlier civilizations have been developed and systematized into a knowledge culture 2 or so centuries prior to Al-Ghazali's time. The development and systematization of knowledge in question took several forms, the most significant of which were categorization of knowledge, meaning something like, say, examples, as Al-Ulum al-Shari'iyah, the Sharia sciences, religious sciences, Al-Ulum al-Naqliyah or Al-Ulum al-Aqliyah. These were categorizations of knowledge introduced by the Muslims. Because in the development of knowledge culture, one has to begin with categorization. And then synthesis of ideas, small synthesis, big synthesis, refinement of inherited academic disciplines. The Muslim Islamic civilization did inherit several sciences from the Greeks, or the creation of new ones, as we see in the classification of knowledge or the classification of the sciences by Al-Farabi, creations of new ones, and also the classification of the sciences. Now, knowledge production and organization, and also knowledge dissemination through education had advanced to new levels of complexity and sophistication. Now, I would say Islamic life and thought had crystallized into different societal dimensions with their respective institutions and also into legal and intellectual schools of thought. So Islamization has indeed become a full-fledged civilization. Furthermore, Islamic civilization had attained stability well before the time of Al-Ghazali. Now, to avoid misunderstanding, let me explain what is meant by the formative period of Islamic civilization being complete and Islamic civilization having attained stability. What I mean, the word complete is that it means that the teachings of the Quran have found practical expressions in all sectors of human life. Right? Now, so well before Al-Ghazali's time, his predecessors have been talking about several categories, several classes of the learner of the ulama. All right, namely the jurists, the fuqaha, the scholastic theologians, the al-mutakallimun, the philosophers. There is the al-falasifa, and also the Sufis, all right, the al-mutasawwifa, the Ismaili scholars, the Talimites. Now, these were already, in a sense, well-defined groups of scholars, each with his own emphasis on the methodological aspects, on the relationship between reason and revelation. So Al-Ghazali inherited that kind of civilization. He was aware, and this was made clear in the several of his writings, especially his autobiography, this kind of semi autobiography, which is this Al-Munkith min al-Dalal. Now, I think this we need to understand that. I will not go into details into that. I would advise, if anybody interested, can go into my book, for example, Classification of Knowledge in Islam, where I talk about this in detail, these various classes as viewed by Al-Ghazali himself. My point is that I would like you to appreciate that in order to understand the various perspectives of psychology in his mind, in his mind, we have to understand these different groups that have existed in his time. Now, how best should how best to introduce Al-Ghazali in the light of this? How best to introduce Al-Ghazali in the light of the situation in his time, especially? Well, first of all right, here again also I will not go into details. All right. First, he was a leading jurist or scholar in the science of jurisprudence of his time. At a young age of just below 30, he was made a law professor at the Nizamiya University in Baghdad, the leading university of the day. He was appointed to the chair of Shafi'i law. He in fact delivered his inaugural lecture. So a tradition that now we are aware that this is a modern practice, but we're talking about here in the 11th century, or the second half, the second half of the 11th century and the beginning of the 12th century. We have this kind of thing. Now, it's interestingly, many leading jurists attended that lecture. One of the attendees was Ibn Aqil, who died 8 years after Al-Ghazali. He was a Hanbalite jurist. He attended that. Now, and another thing also regarding Al-Ghazali's position as a jurist, what I would call that sense of proportion. Al-Ghazali as a man having that sense of proportion. What I mean is this, that to him, reason and rational thinking is not everything. So reason needs to be balanced by something else. So reason and rational thinking are not everything, and it must subordinate itself to the heart. Reason must subordinate itself to heart. The quality of his jurisprudential expertise was enhanced by his multidisciplinary knowledge. This is, I think it's particularly Kalam, which he pursued simultaneously with faith. One can be a leading jurist, but not being an expertise in any other field. No? But in the case of Ghazali, he was a leading jurist. But I would add that the quality of his jurisprudence was enhanced by the fact that he was also a leading authority in many other disciplines, particularly Kalam. Now, he was also a leading scholar of Kalam, was a mutakallim, a brilliant expositor of theological doctrines, intellectual humility, right? He possessed that intellectual humility. Why I would say that? Because he was prepared to criticize his own school, for what he saw, for his own shortcomings. All right, especially in the aspect of methodological, in the aspect of logical reasoning, for example. All right. Yes, he was a mutakallim himself. He was a theologian, but he criticized when he saw that it was necessary to do so, because Kalam has encountered philosophy, and in terms of methods, in terms of ways of reasoning, he thought that this philosophy is slightly better, and Kalam can benefit from that. Now, he also a leading critic of peripatetic philosophy, right? Ghazali, a leading critic of peripatetic philosophy, and in this case, I see some kind of intellectual honesty on his part. Ghazali was intellectually honest, right? A very good example of his honesty. Now, he wanted to criticize. He read a lot about the works of Al-Farabi and Ibn Sina on falsafa, on philosophy. Many things he did not agree. All right, he wanted to criticize them, but to show that he was honest, before he criticized them, he wants to make sure that he understood the philosophers. All right, so he wrote the book, The Aims of the Philosophers. Now, to me, this is a great lesson to be learned from his critic. So when we want to criticize our opponents, such as we don't agree, make sure then we are criticizing the right thing. And Al-Ghazali also a leading authority on Sufi spirituality. And here I detect his sincerity to God. He was sincere. What a greater proof that you need to show his sincerity. He was prepared to abandon a good worldly life for the sake of a spiritual life wholly dedicated to God. We all know about his spiritual crisis, right? 10 years after his first intellectual crisis, he had a spiritual crisis, but he made a decision. He left his good job as a law professor, world fame, just in order to pursue his path to God. So this is how I would like to best describe Al-Ghazali, to introduce Al-Ghazali There are other ways of introducing him, but this is how I do it. Okay, the next one. How best to remember Al-Ghazali? How best to remember him? Well, as a distinguished thinker and public figure in the history of Islam. Indeed, in world history, Al-Ghazali may be remembered for many, many things. But for our purpose here, in this series of lectures, we would like to focus on his reputation as a multidisciplinary authority in the field of knowledge. As we saw, he was an established scholar in the major disciplines of jurisprudence, ilm fiqh, legal philosophy, ilm usul fiqh, dialectical theology, ilm kalam, Sufism, ilm tasawwuf, and he was a philosopher through sublearning. We just saw that. Now, I have here said highlights. How best to remember Al-Ghazali? I've summarized here some of the highlights of his life and thought. First, he reversed legalism by philosophizing usul fiqh. He introduced maqasid al-sharia through his legal work, al-manqul min al-usul, a resume of science or principles. Now, it's important that he emphasized that law, including the Sharia, is about balancing between letter and spirit. That's what it amounts to. In other words, he should be remembered for that, because certainly there was a lot of legalism during his time, and he tried to correct that. Now, the second thing, he inaugurated a new kalam. He inaugurated a new kalam. He in a sense, the founder of the new kalam, which is more philosophical. And this involves legitimate borrowing from falsafa, from philosophers. He made kalam more systematic, thanks to the adoption of the mantiq, which is not just simply the method of jadal, of disputation that preceded it. And of course, he made kalam more respectable. He'll be remembered for that. Now, the third thing is he redrew the boundaries of falsafa and inspired the birth of illuminationist philosophy. This is an interesting thing, because actually, if we look at the writing of Ghazali himself, he was not critical. He did not oppose philosophy as such, but he opposed many tenets of the peripatetic philosophy. So what was critical was philosophy as understood by the Muslim followers of Aristotle. But at the same time, he was influenced by that. So one of the important effects of his critique of the philosophers was he laid down the foundation of, in a sense, he in a sense gave a new orientation to philosophy that gave rise to the birth of another school of philosophy, which was the Islamic philosophy, the illuminationist philosophy of Suhrawardi. Now, the work that influenced Suhrawardi was Mishkatul Anwar. So Mishkatul Anwar, the niche of lights, which is available in English translation, is translated by David Buchman of the Brigham Young University Press. There's a good read if you want to understand the significance of Mishkatul Anwar as a work of epistemology. Now, another aspect is that he re-spiritualized the law. It's related to my first point regarding the law is about balancing between letter and spirit. Now, he re-spiritualized the law, popularized the Sufi epistemology centered on self-purification. And next, he restored the equilibrium between the exoteric and esoteric dimension of Islam. The contestation between the people who emphasize on the exoteric things and those who emphasize on the esoteric was rampant in his time. So he was able to strike a balance, equilibrium between that, and this is clear in his writings, especially his Ihya al-Wuddin. Now, another thing that may be remembered is that he reasserted the supremacy of spiritual life within the framework of the Sharia. And also, another thing, his Ihya became the definitive work on Islamic ethics, personal and communal. This is an important achievement. The Ihya is regarded as the definitive work on Islamic ethics. Now, another thing, of course, this is the most important thing here that I believe that Ghazali should be remembered for. An illustrious synthetical mind. We know very well Ghazali, being trained as a lawyer, as a jurist, was very rational. I mean, his power of rationality can be clearly seen in his works on jurisprudence as well on the Kalam. Basically, these two disciplines, these two fields of study illustrate the kind of analytical mind that he has. But he has also the synthetical mind, all right? But he was a man of synthesis, a man with what I would call the man with the Tawhidic mind. Now, this is what the traditional Hakim is all about. I would argue that Ghazali should be remembered best as a Hakim, as the wise man in whom is embodied several perspectives. In this aspect, I would to refer to what Syed Hussain Nasr has said about Ghazali, also about this Hakim in general. So it is important to understand this if we want to appreciate the kind of the synthesis of psychological perspective that Ghazali has undertaken. He was able to do that because he was the traditional Hakim. Now, Syed Hussain Nasr refers to the traditional Muslim polymath as a universal figure, whom he identifies with the traditional Hakim in Islamic culture, who is a very, very respected figure. Now, throughout Islamic history, says Nasr, the central figure in the transmission of the sciences has been the wise man or Hakim. He has actually been a physician, a writer and poet, an astronomer and mathematician, and above all, a sage. In this figure of the Hakim, one can see the unity of the sciences as so many branches of a tree, whose trunk is the wisdom embodied in the sage. The Hakim has always established the unity of the sciences in the minds of students by the very fact of his teaching of the sciences, the teaching of all the sciences, as so many different applications of the same fundamental principles. Now, the Islamic teaching system as a whole and the classification of the sciences, which forms its metrics, are themselves dependent upon this figure of the Hakim or sage. This is Hakim, the wise man, not Hakim, the judge. This is Hakim, sage. Now, so in his book, Science and Civilization in Islam, which is the original source of the quotation that I've given, Nasser listed as prominent examples 19 universal figures or hukama, plural hakim, in Islamic civilization. Al-Ghazali was included in the list. Nasser provided a brief data of each one of them. Now, he stressed the point that the names of these hakims appear in nearly every field of Islamic science and have left an indelible mark upon the intellectual life of Islam. With respect to Al-Ghazali, Nasser emphasized that, quote, he had more than any other single individual to bring about the intellectual transformation that took place in the Islamic world during the 12th century, end of quote. Now, let me comment on this. Nasser's reference to this hakim. As it was mentioned just now, its meaning, all right, the hakim is a wise man, and as pointed out by Nasser, the kind of knowledge that is associated, the quality of being wise is what is called wisdom, hikmah. Hakim is both an attribute of God and of man. But as a technical term in Islam, it refers to the polymath that its civilization had produced over the centuries. For the hakims or hukama themselves, the hakim par excellence is none other than the Prophet himself. It is interesting to observe that one of the main themes that run through the multidimensional wisdom of the hakim is health. There are several themes, but health is one of these themes that run through the multi-dimensional wisdom of the hakim. Now, as for the dimensions of health, we know very well, okay, especially as understood by the Muslim scholars. First of all, it refers to the health of the body. Second, the health of the soul, and third, the health of society. So we find that in the list of 19 hakim mentioned by Nasser, so we have this hakim, in a sense, being concerned with one or more of these dimensions of health. Some hakims were physicians of the body, like Ibn Sina, who was included in that list. Ibn Sina is a good example of physician of the body, concerned with the health of the body. Then we had the concern of the soul. Well, Al-Ghazali himself was the physician of the soul. He's concerned with the health of the soul. But there are also those who concern the hakims who are concerned with the health of society. And two names were mentioned in that list. One is Al-Farabi, a political scientist, who talks about the health of society, the health of civilization, and the other one is Ibn Khaldun. Ibn Khaldun was included in that list. So what I've done here is to point out the very, very close relationship between wisdom and health of the three types. But this is leading to, when we to talk about, of course, of the soul. I already mentioned this now. Here, at least there are those physicians of the soul, like Ibn Sina. But even in the case of the others, there's the body, there's the physical body and the society. Knowledge of the soul comes in. Let's say, for example, nowadays we refer to the question of social psychology. Now, it is interesting that this subject of social psychology was very much evident in the writings of Al-Farabi. and it's something that needs to be further to be further studied. Now, all right, let me go now to my next slide, which is the next topic. Yes, was Al-Ghazali a psychologist? Now, back that question. Question of what psychology is, all right? Was Al-Ghazali a psychologist? Well, I would say that from modern standard, all right? Modern standard, he's a psychologist. Or even in the modern sense, because you talk about saying the Al-Ghazali was mentioned later. It's about he's a Sufi master who is concerned with about the state of the soul, about psychological health, and then in that sense, he is a psychologist. But let me go here. What my argument said was Al-Ghazali a psychologist? Well, first of all, Al-Ghazali was an author on psychological themes. It's popular writing, of course, Ihya Ulumuddin, which I would consider as a book on psychology, dealing with the theory of psychology, the doctrines of psychology, as well as with certainly with what is today called the cognitive psychology. Ihya Ulumuddin is a work that deserves to be treated as dealing with cognitive psychology and also with behavioral psychology, because it's about shaping human behavior. It's about basically going into the purification of intentions, motivations, how to end up with the correct behavior. So the purpose is correct behavior, recommendable behavior. So popular here is certainly a very important psychological work, and this will be discussed in one of the later lectures. Now, there are 4 key terms. There are 4 key terms in this book, which I explain. Inshallah, this will be in the later lecture and the next lecture. Now, 4 key terms: heart, is called spirit, ruh, soul, nerves, and intellect. This is the key terms in this work. Now, it is very important work. It's in modern terms, we are talking about 4 volumes, each volume with 10 chapters altogether, 40 chapters dealing with all the important themes about spiritual health, psychological health. Now, it also contains what we call therapeutic psychology or psychotherapy in terms of the modern terminology. Yes, it is certainly it can be considered as work on therapeutic psychology. Now, as for special treatises on psychology, there is one work which is very, very interesting indeed. The title is Al-Madnun bihi al-Wairi ahlihi, which I translated as that which is withheld from its non-specialist, from its non-expertise. Now, this book was translated into English in, I think it's 1981, translated by Abdul Qayyum, published by established by, I think, the published that. Inshallah, I'll come to that. Now, all right. Now, this, and for this work, why I would say it's very, very interesting. Al-Madnun bihi, this book, Al-Wairi ahlihi, it is a work on revealed psychology. What I mean by revealed psychology is that it's based upon interpretations of verses of the Quran on the soul, right? and I put a bracket, there's a pneumatology, right? Based on earlier explanation of what pneumatology is. And it is a work on metaphysical principles of psychology. It is also a work which is a work on theology and metaphysics of the soul. Yeah, so this let me see what I have is some comments on that here. Yeah. Now, yes, this Muhammad Ashraf. Muhammad Ashraf Lahore published that. It was 1981. I bought the book just after it was published. That was I'm talking about 40 years ago, more than 40 years ago, that book. So the now regarding this the content of this book, all right. Al-Ghazali was commenting on the Quranic verse that I read earlier, all right? Surah 15, verse 29. This that verse, فَإِذَا سَوَيْتُهُ وَنَفَخْتُ فِيهِ مِنْ رُوحِي فَقَعُوا لَهُ سَاجِدِينَ. All right. When I have proportioned him and breathed into him of my spirit, fall down before him prostrating. Now, the actually, according to that book, a group of Ghazali students asked him to give a commentary on that, asking him, what does the word, what does taswiyah mean? What does this nafkun, that's the blowing, what does nafkun or breath mean? So two words, taswiyah and nafkun, that's breath, and also another word is surah, based on the hadith, the form, surah, which is related to the natures of the soul. Now, this book would really, I would say, contains ideas of Al-Ghazali on pneumatology rather than psychology in the modern sense, because it is about the metaphysics of the soul, about the origin of the soul and the nature of the soul, and about levels of reality that are not covered by modern psychology, despite the referring to the maybe in terms of terminology, Clearance cabinet that covers the same thing, but actually it is not. Right now, so this is basically for Al-Ghazali, taswiyah, which is based in the verse that I quoted. Of course, we have that sawaituhu, that's sawa, yeah, sawa. Now the taswiyah here, actually, by that he means this preparedness of matter, the preparedness of matter or body to receive the Adamic soul, or the entry of the soul into the specially prepared matter. And here, of course, the Ghazali said the blowing, the nafkun, occurs simultaneously. Okay. The proportioning, the taswiyah, and the nafkun, the blowing, occur simultaneously. Now, Ghazali distinguished between taswiyah in the case of Adam and taswiyah in the case of his descendants. In the case of Adam, Ghazali said, the matter in question, the matter into which the soul enters, that is the refined and specially prepared clay. In the case of Adam's descendants, the matter in question is sperm. Now, this is quite interesting, because what this implies is that Ghazali believes in the special creation of Adam, and then in the case of descendants, that follows the biological process that we know very well. This anyway, it's a very significant psychological work that should be studied. In that book, also, Al-Ghazali refers, of course, to the hadith, all right, that the hadith, the famous hadith regarding soul, right, which is important, which has implications for the nature of the soul. And the other one is Rahman, that Allah has created Adam in his form, in the form of the Rahman. Now, these hadiths are important. In fact, Al-Ghazali repeated this in different verses in different places in the Ihya al-Mudin, because it is important to him to emphasize the nature of the attributes of the soul. The soul possesses godlike attributes based on this hadith. Now, there's a very important principle in understanding the nature of the human soul in relation to God, or in the question of relationship between the self, the individual self, small s, with self with a capital S. Yes. Now, Al-Ghazali, besides that, besides being the author on the psychological theme, he was a Sufi master. Al-Ghazali was a Sufi master, concerned the theory and practice of Sufi psychology. He established a Sufi convent, Hanka, for Sufi adepts, where, in a sense, the spiritual psychology is being taught. He taught science of the soul, the ilm nafs, to the students. Right? So these are sufficient for us to consider, well, certainly to establish the fact that Al-Ghazali was indeed a psychologist. All right, then I'll go to the next slide like that. Yes, now the synthesis, the last part of my lecture today. Al-Ghazali's psychology, a synthesis perspective. Now, basically, these are the streams. These are different streams of currents in Al-Ghazali's mind. First of all, there is the revealed psychology, which I mentioned already just now, about his work. The as mentioned just now, Al-Majnun. We see in the writings of Al-Ghazali references to the Quran, to the Hadith, which produce what I call the revealed psychology, and this is evident in his Kalam, for example. Now, the other one is jurisprudential psychology. The other one is Kalam psychology. The other one is peripatetic psychology, Sufi psychology. This exists in his mind, but he was able to synthesize that. Now, let me explain a bit of in the case of each of these psychologists. All right. In the case of revealed psychology, I mean, I just mentioned just now that what I mean by that his psychology that is based on the Quran and Hadith, which is very much evident in his writings. Now, the jurisprudential psychology. This should be interesting term to consider. Now, what I mean by jurisprudential psychology, that is related to the discipline of jurisprudence to faith. We already know that Al-Ghazali is an expert in that, in jurisprudence. But in what way that psychology is brought into that subject? So I argue that there is such a thing as jurisprudential psychology in the thought of Al-Ghazali, because this pertains to the submission of the soul or self to the divine will, or self with a capital S, and the accompanying spiritual experiences of the heart and mind. Now, I would argue that Salat, for example, is submission of the soul, submission of the soul to divine will par excellence. Salat, prayer, mechanical prayer. So, jurisprudential psychology is about understanding the psychological basis of jurisprudence. There is well, in the case of jurisprudence, it also has biological basis, biological as well as psychological. Because in Islam there is no cleavage between natural law and the Sharia. So the Sharia will not be opposed to the biological perspective. So yes, I'm saying that there is a social basis of jurisprudence because this is an issue it's a related issue in behavioral psychology from the perspective of the Sharia. The Sharia is about determining the ethical parameters of human behavior. The 5 legal ethical categories of human behavior: obligatory, wajib; forbidden, haram; meritorious or recommended, mubah; reprehensible, makruh; and indifferent, mubah. Now, jurisprudence has a well-defined role in differentiating these categories of human acts. Now, there are other issues. There are other issues. Okay, just a few. There are other issues, of course, related to this jurisprudential psychology. Disciplining of the soul, disciplining the soul at the level of the Sharia, with faith as the instrument, right? This particular psychology is about disciplining the soul at the level of the Sharia with faith as its instrument. There are such issues as generational identity psychology, the meanings, what we call it, the generation, child, youth, adult, and the elderly. Now, what is the relationship between age, psychological maturity, and religious duties? Actually, literature in this field, in jurisprudential works, is available, right? These issues of how to link psychologically as far as the religious duties are concerned. Now, to cut short, the Kalam psychology, right? Now, this pertains to the beliefs and freedom of the will, the nature of the soul, the attributes of the soul, God-like attributes, the human being have God-like attributes. Now, this can be seen. In other words, the elements of psychology are in the writings of Al-Ghazali, right? And in the Kalam works before Al-Ghazali, even in the case of Ash'ari, for example, we already find this discussion on the freedom of the will, question of the attributes of the soul that are godlike, especially with regard to speaking, hearing, knowledge. Yeah. Now, the question of the peripatetic psychology, meaning here the psychology associated with the followers of Aristotle. Al-Ghazali was very much familiar with that, especially through the works of Farabi and Ibn Sina, which he studied. There are a lot of ideas in natural philosophy, including psychology, that are taken from this work. But Al-Ghazali is known as a critic of philosophy, falsafa, but people do not care much. I mean, little they know much about how much Al-Ghazali incorporated ideas from those whom he criticized. Now, basically, what is known as faculty psychology of the practical philosophers very much influenced Al-Ghazali. Even in the work I cited, Al-Madnun, quite clearly we can discern the influence of the peripatetic faculty psychology on Al-Ghazali. Then, of course, Sufi psychology. Now, Al-Ghazali made clear that he owed to he owed Sufi ideas to many previous Sufis, especially Al-Muhasibi who died in 837, exercised a great influence on Al-Ghazali, both in matters of doctrines and also in matters of practices. Now, and of course, the other names mentioned by him, Al-Junaid, Al-Shibli, Al-Bastami, right? But the most important person, I think, to have influenced Al-Ghazali to take the Sufi path was his own brother, Ahmad Al-Ghazali. According to the Sufi circles, it was Ahmad himself, his brother, who initiated Al-Ghazali into Sufism. Besides Ahmad, of course, there's Al-Farmadi, who was one of his teachers, who also came from Tus. Now, let me conclude my presentation with this the question of why was it possible for Al-Ghazali to create this synthesis, right? Now, yes, what integrative and unifying or synthesis wisdom did Al-Ghazali have that enabled him to carry out the synthesis? Well, the synthesis was done in the post-spiritual crisis. Now, it is the same universal wisdom that is in the possession of all the Hakims. Although, admittedly, there may be particular forms of wisdom that are specific to certain Hakims or as dictated by their professions or fields of expertise. Generally speaking, the wisdom needed for integration, unification, and synthesis is none other than the principle of At-Tawheed in its various forms of application, in conformity with the doctrine of the beautiful names of God, Al-Asma al-Husna. Now, this should be obvious enough to Muslims, since At-Tawheed is the core teaching of the religion of Islam, and the principle is embodied in the first Shahada, which is the first pillar of Islam. But somehow, the message of At-Tawheed with respect to integration, unification, and synthesis was missed. And this was missed, I think, on account of two failures. One, the failure to regard, to view At-Tawheed as an epistemological principle. Instead, it's just viewed as a theological principle, as a religious principle, but not as an epistemological principle. And number two, the failure to draw the necessary consequences of Tawheed. In other words, the Tawheed is to be understood at various levels. Tawheed is applied to the cosmos, as applied to the natural world, as applied to the microcosm, the human person, basically to the souls. Right? We do not draw the necessary consequences for that. But actually, it is not without significance that Al-Ghazali wrote a book entitled "The 99 Beautiful Names of God." Now, the question now, how Al-Ghazali was able to connect all the ideas from jurisprudence, from Kalam, from Falsafa, from Sufism, is precisely this ability to interrelate, to connect, right? To integrate based on the principle of Tawhid, based on the knowledge of the attributes and qualities of God, which is evidence, which is to be found in all branches, in all fields of human thought, of life and of thought. So I think that's my presentation for this first lecture. Is actually it is in this lecture it's not going into detail yet on the particular psychological issues that Ghazali did, but to set the background. As you can see, basically it's kind of background for me to raise a number of issues, and from there, inshallah, we'll be able to talk in better light about Al-Ghazali's psychology. So thank you. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Wa alaikum assalam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Thank you so much, dear Professor Osman, for an excellent lecture. It was such an honor to listen to you. I speak for all of our members and participants, excellent brothers and sisters, that we're very grateful and appreciated for you taking your time and to be so generous with your vast amount of knowledge, experience, and expertise in Imam Ghazali, rahimahullah. So please, everybody, dear brothers and sisters and participants, round of digital applause to your excellent Professor Osman Bakar for his excellent talk. Barakallahu feekum, Ustad. And Professor Osman, there's a lot of excitement and a lot of questions and reflections in the Zoom chat. So I will address some of them to you, inshallah. And those that we will not be having time to address, we will ask Professor Osman for his permission to write some answers to them or to address them in upcoming sessions, inshallah. We will be with each other during a duration of 5 months, dear excellent brothers and sisters. So we will have time to really enjoy the suhbah and also to learn collectively through the leadership of Professor Osman, inshallah. Barakallahu feekum. So dear Professor Osman, there are a lot of questions actually with regards to your excellent lecture. So Professor Hamidullah Marazi from Kashmir, he's asking, can we use nafs and ruh simultaneously in the Ghazalian perspective? And how can we relate these terms to modern psychic phenomenon, sir?
So can you repeat the question, please?
Of course, Professor Osman. So Professor Hamidullah, he is asking, can we use nafs and ruh simultaneously in the Ghazalian perspective? And how can we relate these terms to modern psychic phenomenon, sir?
You see, can we use
nafs and ruh simultaneously in the Ghazalian perspective? And how can we relate these terms to modern psychic phenomenon?
Well, I prefer not to answer yet this question, because it will be better that we discuss this in the in the next lecture. But the yeah, just simply to respond to that, if you answer yes, I mean, I think it is possible, of course, yeah. But I don't want to go into the details yet, because I plan that to be done within the next lecture.
Inshallah, we'll wait until next lecture.
But yes, but in other words, it is the application is possible.
All right. There is actually Professor Hamidullah has a lot of questions. So I'll take another one and then we will address other brothers and sisters' questions as well.
I would prefer, we have 5 lectures, man. We try to focus on issues that I raise in this.
Okay.
In this lecture, because people can ask any question at that, then I mean the whole purpose of having 5 lectures is gone.
I understand. And that's a good nasiha. We will try to ask our participants to only ask questions regarding the issues raised in the lectures moving forward. So yeah, that's good. I'll try to filter out some of the questions, inshallah. So we will address only those that are related to the lecture today. So there is a question from Brother Nuruddin from Indonesia. He's asking, Professor Osman Bakar, regarding the difference between Numa and Psyche, is it related to the debate among Muslim philosophers about whether the spirit or body was created first? Ibn Sina, for example, thinks that spiritual things cannot be divided. So it is rational if the human body was created first and then filled with the spirit. Hope you can explain this. Barakallahu feekum.
Yes, thank you. This is related to the lecture today. All right. That's why I mentioned in my presentation that what is called there's two aspects of the soul. All right. Now, the pneumatology that deals with the knowledge of the origin of the soul, the origin of the spirit, the nature of that. We talk about the souls independently of the bodies, of the matter into which they enter relationships. All right. Yes, there are differences of views on this. Even you mentioned Ibn Sina, for example, but I just want to give the position which is, in a sense, which is common to all the perspectives in Islamic psychology. Right? In other words, there's an agreement. There's the agreement that the soul, the individual soul, about the individual souls result from association, from relationship with the body. Otherwise, the soul, anyway, the soul is indivisible. The soul indivisible. Right? There is the universal soul. Is one. For that reason, especially the Sufis, all right, and the philosophers, also the philosophers introduced the concept of universal soul, which is based upon the Quran, based upon the idea that the verse that refers that all souls originate from that an-nafs al-wahida, that single soul. That single soul has been interpreted to mean the universal soul. So the individual soul come from the universal soul, and the soul, the physical soul, we return. After death, we return to that universal soul. Now, in other words, what does it mean by pneumatology? The pneuma refer to more to that universal dimension of the universal, the spiritual dimension, independently, independently of matter of the body. It's not about the history of the soul entering into some relationship with bodies that belong to what is understood as the ilmul nafs, for example, as articulated by the philosophers. First, the Ibn Sina concept falls under that category. Yeah, but the question then whether that the entry of the soul into the body, that is simultaneous. Question is after something that. That is where this the question is. I pointed out the word by Al-Ghazali just now, al-madnun bi al-alihi, all right? So he refers to in other words, to that that the blowing of the spirit into the body, the tasfiyah, the entry, and the blowing, nafkun, that happened at the same time. I think the differences of rise question how to interpret thumma, for example. The thumma, is it the sequence in terms of time, or no? Just that is a kind of logical sequence. It happens. It's independently of the time. It is not. We cannot talk about here quantitative time because it refers to, it pertains to the realm of the spirit, to the question of and to mean that there's a time lapse. There's no time lapse there. It is a simultaneous thing, right? That was my response to that. In other words, here, the importance, therefore, for us to look at two dimensions of the soul. The metaphysical dimension, which is probably done in pneumatology, but there is a scientific example which is done by scientific psychology, which goes into those various instances, various conditions when the soul enter into relation with a particular. Anyway, why do you have multiplicity of soul? It is bodies. Multiplicity of souls result from the universal soul precisely because of the presence of bodies. It is bodies that divide, that result in multiplicity of souls. There is Al-Ghazali's explanation, but I think that's also the view of the Falasifa.
Barakallahu fikum, Professor. Thank you so much for a thorough explanation and answer. We really appreciate it. So there is a similar question, but framed a little bit differently, dear Professor. It's from Isham from Malaysia. He's asking, forgive me if I misunderstood Professor Osman, but with regards to your remark that the pneuma or higher soul cannot be applied to modern psychology, does that then imply that all psychological problems are related to the lower soul?
Yes, that's what I'm arguing, I'm maintaining. Certainly, the belief that was the opinion of Houston Smith, for example. I cited that. I said why that he does not want to use the word psychology to describe the whole thing called the soul. Right? Now, he said he cannot accept that precisely because now there's kind of qualitatively speaking, there are dimensions of the soul or the spirit that are not taken, that are not really covered by modern psychology. In other words, the question of the very simple example. Let's say the question of the what in tradition is called the angels, Now, scientifically speaking, first speaking, what are angels? Angels are souls. Or in the case of the Al-Farabi, refers to that as the intellects. Angels are intellects, or cool. The same nature as human intellects. Now, but in the West, in the beginning of the modern period, the soul, the angels were just removed, vanish from the cosmos. There's no place of that. All right. So, but the souls, the angels, also known as the souls, the spirit. I mean, they belong to another. Ontologically speaking, they belong to another realm, because they do not have bodies in the sense they are not. They do not have physical bodies. So here, the question of here, whether in other question here, well, the question asked to me, is it true that I'm saying that the modern psychology does not cover realities within the human being? After all, we are microcosms. So everything that exists in the cosmos also exists within us. So Smith's argument is that no, modern psychology, as we understand it, does not cover certain ontological realities related to the soul. certainly not that spirit that was blown, that spirit that was blown into the body of Adam. So basically, that is the argument. Yeah.
Barakallah
Unless
fikum,
we can
Ustad.
get any counter argument, right?
SubhanAllah. Thank you so much, Professor. Great reflections and answers. I'm trying to filter down the questions, dear Professor, so it's according to the topic of today. So I think for next time, we will be a little bit more thorough in asking our excellent participants to only ask questions regarding the specific topic of the lecture. And some of your questions, dear brothers and sisters, will be answered during the duration of the 5 series sessions with Professor Osman, inshallah. I'll try to address 2 questions more. I'm mindful of the time. We have 9 minutes left, Professor Osman, so we'll take 2 more questions, inshallah. So Radzi Sapia, he's asking, Salam. Al-Ghazali is said to have renewed, or rather purified, the philosophical approach of the Muslims, which were inherited from the Greeks, particularly Aristotelian thought via Al-Farabi. Since you mentioned the concept of Numa and the psyche, which were brought by the Greeks, how did the Muslims view it before and after Imam Ghazali?
I think that's why I think it is important to understand about Al-Ghazali, not just based on 1 or 2 works, right? The work that I mentioned just now, Al-Madnoon, for example, Al-Madnoon, that clearly shows that there is conformity with what Al-Ghazali believes, right? And was believed also among by Plato, for example. Now we have to understand what is it really that Al-Ghazali was not critical of as far as the Greeks. There are, a question of the eternity of the world, for example, is one of them. But to say that just because he criticized the philosophers, therefore he disagreed on practically every issue, that is not true. Yeah. Basically, most of the thing in the case in the Tahfud, the Falasifa, is that Al-Ghazali was again to say that the case name and the way the philosophers want to defend is about certain position, he doesn't accept that as being insufficient. In other words, it's not so much the ideas that is rejected, but the arguments used by the philosophers are not acceptable, right? Rather than, that's why I said, as far as what the doctrines themselves, you will answer in another place, in the writing. Yeah. So back the question of the soul. When I compare, for example, the meaning of Numa in the Greek context, especially the Plato and Aristotle, there is not much difference what Ghazali believes. And it's very interesting, the symbolism of the blowing of that spirit. The spirit is blown somewhere, right? So the meaning of the word Numa is the same as the meaning of nafkun, to breathe. One of the meanings of Numa is breath, breathe. And in the case of course, in the case of Ibn Arabi, he takes another word, it's nafs, and that's nafas. So it's just breathing also, but it's not blowing there, but blowing and breathing here have the close meaning. So to cut short to your question, well, then there may be other things. The question Ghazali did not agree with the posthumous, and that is something of the posthumous condition of the soul. Yes, there are many issues. When you go into detail, the Ghazali did not agree, because Ghazali depends certain beliefs about the posthumous condition of the soul. But as far the origins of the spirit, the nature of the spirit, there are many similarities. Okay.
Barakallahu feekum, Ustad. I think that we will conclude with a last question, Professor, and then we will wrap it up for this first excellent lecture with you. So I'm trying to filter down here. So there is a question which I find related to the topic. It's regarding, so after listening to Professor Osman's first lecture, this is from Abdul Rahman, I conclude that Imam Ghazali's Ihya Ulumuddin has a wider coverage than modern psychology, whereas modern psychology is concerned with balance of the mind. Imam Ghazali synthesized balance of mind, soul, and heart. Does Professor Osman agree?
Yeah, I mean, I more or less, yes. I mean, that I agree with that. In other words, just take in anything. Say, for example, the question of intelligence. Intelligence is part of psychology, the study of intelligence. Now, we know very well in the case of Al-Farabi, Ibn Sina, and so on, they have a theory of intelligence, which is part of faculty psychology. The theory is cognitive psychology. That started with the lowest level of intelligence. Intelligence in animals, for example, even intelligence in some plants. They even acknowledge some intelligence in certain plant species, some high intelligence in the animal, high intelligence in the human being, then intelligence because the angels themselves are considered intelligences. Now for example, refers to the Archangel Gabriel, Jibreel alayhi salam, as the active intellect, which is something related also to what's understood by Aristotle. So in other words, the concept of that entity called, religiously speaking, is Jibreel alayhi salam. Philosophically speaking, it's called the active intellect, which has that relationship with the earth. We know very well that in Islam, the function of Gabriel is to bring the messages from God to all the prophets, right? So what we try to formulate that in philosophical term, which is the same, all right? So now that active intellect, as understood by the Muslim psychology, the Muslim philosophy, where is that to be found in modern psychology? So that is that gap, right? So whether you are referring to the heart, the core, we're referring to the nerves, the soul, or the spirit, what? Yeah. If we compare the two grounds, the traditional psychology in Islam and the modern one, we can point out that this is important. It's not so much the terminology, the clear of them, maybe that doesn't tell, right? But it's important to go into the reality. We need to look into the reality implied by those terms. I think we need to do that. Okay.
Barakallah. Barakallah fikum, Professor Osman. And with that excellent answer, we will conclude and summarize the lecture for today. First and foremost, Professor Osman, thank you so much for giving so much of your generous, of your time, of your precious time. We really appreciate your generosity. Round of digital applause to our excellent Murabbi, Professor Osman Bakar. Thank you so much. We're really looking forward to meet you next month, inshallah. Let me just announce a couple of things before we end. From the behalf of ISIP, the International Students of Islamic Psychology, and ISTAC-IIUM, we want to thank all of you who participate today, dear brothers and sisters. We have a lot of people from Malaysia, Indonesia, but also from US and Canada, from all over the world, from Africa, Europe, South America, Asia, Middle East, Australia, New Zealand. So most welcome. And next lecture will be Saturday, the 4th of June. And the topic will be Al-Ghazali's understanding of psychological wellness and illnesses, together with Professor Osman Bakar. In a matter of 3 to 4 days, we will email out to all of you who registered to the program a kit which includes a link to this lecture with Professor Osman today that you can enjoy watching again. Also the assessment. So if you want to receive an e-certificate, you need to do all the 5 assessments that will be offered to all of you. Every lecture has 1 assessment, so you need to do that and pass that as well. And also to do the prior readings to the different modules in this 5 series lectures with Professor Osman. We will also email you some links to WhatsApp groups for discussions regarding this particular course. We will establish a group for that. And if you have any other questions regarding the lectures or other thoughts, feel free to email us. We will email out our email address to all of you as well, but it's admin@isip.foundation. And you can also answer the email that you registered to and that you received the Zoom link and all other information with regards to the 5 series lectures with Professor Osman Bakar. So just a brief summarized information regarding the program as we speak. So next session will be Saturday, the 4th of June. And with that said, I think we're done for today. Thank you, Professor Osman, once more. Thank you to all excellent brothers and sisters from all over the world. It's such an honor to have you with us. Please forgive us for any shortcoming as ISIP. We're the ones who are responsible for all the shortcomings, and all the good comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we really appreciate to be students of our excellent teacher, Professor Osman Bakar. And Eid Mubarak to all of you, even though Eid is over. We wish you all Eid Mubarak. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant all of you Eid filled with joy, sohbah, and happiness. And may we keep the spirit of the holy month of Ramadan alive in all other months as well. And we as students and seekers of knowledge, and particularly all of us who are interested in Islamic psychology, within Ilm al-Nafs, we have a lot of the precious gems that also the holy month of Ramadan offers us, which is ibadah, which is dhikr, which is contemplation and tafakkur, which is muraqabah, muhasabah, and all other excellent spiritual practices that Imam Ghazali actually always recommended us to partake as Muslims, inshallah. So without any further ado, we will end the lecture and the session for today. We will email out all information. And thank you so much, Professor Osman. Send our regards to your family and have a great day, inshallah, dear excellent Rabbi Abbas. Barakallah fikum. Everybody, thank you so much. And from the behalf of ISTAC and IIUM and ISIP, we wish you all a great continuation of your morning, day, evening, and night. Barakallah fikum. And we will end just by reciting Surah Al-Asr, inshallah. So, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Wal-Asr, Inna nisana la fi khusr, Inna ladina amanu wa amilu salihat, wa tawasaw bil-haqqi, wa tawasaw bis-sabr.
Shukran.
Barakallah fikum, everyone. Assalamu
alaikum.
Assalamu alaikum. Jazakallah khairan. Thank you, Professor Osman. Thank you all. Excellent.